Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the English Learning Podcast, your go-to place for improving your English skills, one conversation at a time. I'm Jason, your host, and today we're diving into a topic that could transform how you learn English. But before we get started, let me introduce my co-host. Hi, Anna.
Hi, Jason. Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be here. Today's topic is one I'm particularly passionate about because it's a game changer for anyone learning a new language.
Absolutely, Anna. So, what are we talking about? Well, we're going to explore how to train your brain to think in English.
That's right. Thinking in English can help you become more fluent, speak more naturally, and even reduce that frustrating pause when you're trying to find the right words.
And it's not as hard as you might think. In this episode, we'll share practical tips, discuss common challenges, and answer some of your questions about this process. So, whether you're a beginner or an advanced learner, there's something here for everyone.
We've got a lot to cover, so grab a notebook or just sit back and relax. Let's get started.
All right, let's kick things off with the big question. Why should you train your brain to think in English? It might seem like an extra step, but it's one of the most effective ways to improve your fluency. Anna, what do you think is the biggest benefit of thinking in English?
Great question, Jason. For me, the biggest benefit is fluency. When you think in English, you're not constantly translating in your head, which saves time and helps your speech flow more naturally. It's like you're bypassing that mental traffic jam.
Exactly. And that brings us to a key point. When you think in English, you're creating a more direct link between your thoughts and your speech. You're training your brain to process English in real time, which can lead to quicker responses in conversations.
Right. Plus, thinking in English helps with vocabulary retention. When you use English words in your thoughts, you're reinforcing those words in a meaningful way. It's like practicing without even realizing it.
That's a great point. And let's not forget about confidence. When you're able to think in English, you feel more confident because you're less worried about making mistakes or pausing to translate.
Absolutely. And confidence is crucial when learning a language. When you think in English, even your inner dialogue becomes a practice session. It's like having a little English coach in your head cheering you on.
I like that. And there's another important aspect: immersion. When you think in English, you're essentially creating a mini immersion environment for yourself, even if you're not in an English-speaking country. It's like taking a piece of that environment with you wherever you go.
That's so true. And speaking of immersion, there's something psychological about it too. When you start thinking in English, you begin to see the world through the lens of the language. It becomes a part of your daily life, rather than just something you study.
That's a great insight, Anna. So, to summarize, thinking in English can improve your fluency, boost your confidence, help with vocabulary retention, and create a mental immersion experience. It's like rewiring your brain to be more English-friendly.
And the best part is, anyone can do it with a bit of practice and patience. Later in the episode, we'll share some practical tips to help you get started.
That's right. But before we get into the how, let's talk about some of the challenges people face when trying to think in English. Stay with us. Welcome back. Now that we've talked about the benefits of thinking in English, let's dive into some of the common challenges learners face when they start this practice. Anna, what do you think is the biggest hurdle?
One of the biggest hurdles, Jason, is the habit of translating. Most learners are used to thinking in their native language and then translating into English. It's a tough habit to break because it feels safe, but it slows you down and makes your speech sound less natural.
That's a big one. And I think another challenge is vocabulary limitations. When you're trying to think in English but don't know certain words, It can be frustrating. That frustration can lead to giving up on the practice altogether.
True. It's easy to feel stuck when you hit a word you don't know, but it's important to remember that it's okay to not know every word. The key is to find ways around it, like using simpler words or even describing the thing you're thinking about.
Another challenge is the fear of making mistakes. Even in your thoughts, you might worry about getting grammar wrong. That fear can make the whole process feel overwhelming.
Yes, and it's important to remind yourself that it's perfectly fine to make mistakes, especially in your own thoughts. The goal is progress, not perfection. Think of it as a practice run. You're learning and improving as you go.
And then there's the challenge of consistency. It's easy to start thinking in English for a day or two, but maintaining that habit can be tough, especially when life gets busy.
Definitely. Consistency is key, but it's also one of the hardest things to achieve. It's important to create small, manageable habits that fit into your daily routine so it doesn't feel like a chore.
What about you, Anna? Have you faced any of these challenges in your own language learning journey?
Oh, absolutely. When I was learning a new language, I struggled with the fear of making mistakes. I didn't want to think wrong. But once I realized that thinking in a new language was a safe space to practice without judgment, it became a lot easier.
That's a great perspective. And it brings up another point: mindset. If you approach thinking in English with a growth mindset, understanding that mistakes are part of the process, you'll be much more successful.
Exactly. It's about being kind to yourself and recognizing that every step, even the challenging ones, is part of your progress. And speaking of mindset, later we'll discuss how to stay motivated even when these challenges arise.
Perfect. But before we move on, let's sum up. The common challenges include the habit of translating, limited vocabulary, fear of making mistakes, and consistency. Remember, these challenges are normal, and with the right strategies, they can be overcome.
That's right. And speaking of strategies, after this short break, we'll dive into some practical tips to help you train your brain to think in English. Don't go anywhere.
Welcome back! Now that we've discussed the benefits and challenges of thinking in English, it's time to get into the practical part. Tips and strategies you can use to train your brain to think in English. Anna, where should we start?
Let's start with a simple but powerful tip: labeling. You can label objects around your house in English. For example, put a sticky note on your refrigerator that says fridge or on your mirror that says mirror. This way, you're constantly reinforcing English vocabulary in your daily environment.
That's a great one. Another tip is to keep a journal in English. Writing down your thoughts or even a daily diary entry helps you practice thinking in English. Plus, it gives you a chance to work on sentence structure and vocabulary.
Absolutely, Jason. And if you're not into writing, you can talk to yourself in English. It might feel a little strange at first, but it's a fantastic way to practice thinking and speaking in English simultaneously. For example, describe what you're doing as you're doing it. I'm making coffee, or I'm getting ready for work.
I love that. Another tip is to set your devices to English. Whether it's your phone, computer, or social media apps, having everything in English creates a natural exposure to the language throughout your day.
That's a good one. And while we're on the topic of technology, using language learning apps can be really helpful. Many apps have exercises that encourage you to think in English, like Duolingo or Memrise. They often include listening and speaking components, which are great for reinforcing your skills.
Another fun tip is to immerse yourself in English media. Watch movies, TV shows, or listen to podcasts in English. Try to avoid subtitles in your native language. Even if you don't understand everything, your brain is absorbing the rhythm, intonation, and common phrases of the language.
Yes. And if you're feeling adventurous, try reading a book in English. Start with something simple, like a children's book or a book you've already read in your native language. It helps build your confidence and makes the process enjoyable.
Another practical tip is to find a language partner or join a conversation group. Speaking with others in English forces you to think in English in real time. It's a great way to build your conversational skills and learn new expressions.
Exactly. And here's a tip for when you're on your own. Practice visualization. For example, when you're at the grocery store, think about what you need to buy and describe it in English in your head. It's a subtle way to integrate English into your daily tasks.
Visualization is a powerful tool. And lastly, don't forget to reward yourself. Celebrate small victories, like successfully thinking in English for 5 minutes a day. It helps keep you motivated and makes the process enjoyable.
Great point, Jason. To recap, some practical tips include labeling objects, keeping a journal, talking to yourself, setting devices to English, using language learning apps, immersing in media, reading books, finding language partners, and practicing visualization.
That's right. Remember, the key is consistency. The more you practice, the easier it becomes to think in English naturally.
And coming up next, we'll talk about mindset and motivation, how to keep going even when it feels tough. Stay tuned.
Welcome back. So far, we've talked about why thinking in English is beneficial, some common challenges, and practical tips to help you get started. Now, let's talk about something equally important: mindset and motivation. Anna, why is mindset so crucial in language learning?
Mindset is everything, Jason. Learning a new language can be challenging, and your attitude toward those challenges can make all the difference. If you approach learning with a growth mindset, believing that your abilities can improve with effort, you're more likely to persist and succeed.
That's so true. A lot of learners get discouraged when they make mistakes or don't see immediate progress. But mistakes are a natural part of learning, right?
Exactly. Mistakes are actually opportunities to learn. If you can reframe mistakes as stepping stones rather than obstacles, you'll be much more resilient. Remember, even native speakers make mistakes.
Absolutely. And that leads us to another important point: setting realistic expectations. Learning to think in English isn't going to happen overnight. It's a gradual process, and that's okay. Setting small, achievable goals can help you stay motivated.
Yes, like starting with 5 minutes a day of thinking in English, then gradually increasing the time. Celebrate those small wins. It's all progress.
Speaking of celebrating, how important is self-reward in staying motivated?
It's crucial. Rewarding yourself for reaching milestones, no matter how small, keeps you motivated. It could be something as simple as treating yourself to a nice cup of coffee or taking a break to do something you love after a good practice session.
Great advice. And let's talk about the power of positive reinforcement. Instead of focusing on what you can't do yet, focus on what you've already achieved. Keeping a positive outlook can help you push through the tough times.
Exactly. And it's also important to be patient with yourself. Progress might be slow at times, but every bit of effort you put in is bringing you closer to your goal. Keep reminding yourself of why you started learning English in the first place.
That's a great point. Reflecting on your motivation, whether it's for work, travel, or personal growth, can help you stay focused and committed.
And if you ever feel stuck or demotivated, it's helpful to change things up. Try a new method, like listening to a podcast or joining an online community of learners. Sometimes a fresh approach can reignite your passion for learning.
That's a fantastic tip. And let's not forget about the importance of community. Surrounding yourself with supportive people, whether it's a language partner, a tutor, or a learning group, can make the journey less lonely and more fun.
Absolutely. Sharing your progress and challenges with others can be incredibly motivating. Plus, you can learn from each other's experiences and strategies.
So, to sum up, a positive mindset, patience, realistic goal setting, self-reward, and community support are all essential for staying motivated when learning to think in English.
That's right. Remember, learning is a journey, not a race. Every step you take brings you closer to your goal, so keep going and enjoy the process.
And with that, we're wrapping up this segment. But stick around. Up next, we'll answer some of your questions about thinking in English. You won't want to miss it. Welcome back. Now it's time for one of our favorite parts of the podcast, Listener Q&A. We've received some great questions from you about thinking in English, and we're excited to dive in. Anna, what's our first question?
Our first question comes from Maria in Brazil. She asks, "How do I stop translating in my head when I'm trying to think in English?"
Great question, Maria. The key is practice and exposure. Start small by thinking about simple, everyday things in English. For instance, when you're making breakfast, think, "I am making coffee," instead of translating from your native language. Over time, your brain will get used to processing thoughts directly in English.
That's right, Jason. Also, try to immerse yourself in English as much as possible. Listening to English music, podcasts, or watching shows can help train your brain to recognize and think in English without the need for translation.
Exactly. All right, our next question is from Ahmed in Egypt. He asks, "What should I do when I don't know a word while thinking in English?"
That's a common issue, Ahmed. When you come across a word you don't know, try to describe it in English. For example, if you can't think of the word umbrella, you might say, "The thing that keeps me dry when it rains." This helps you keep thinking in English without breaking the flow.
That's a fantastic strategy. You can also make a note of the unknown word and look it up later. Gradually, you'll expand your vocabulary and find yourself thinking of the right words more easily.
Exactly. Next up, we have a question from Jin in South Korea. She asks, "How can I stay consistent with thinking in English? I start strong but lose momentum after a few days."
Great question, Jin. Consistency can be tough, but creating a routine can help. Set a specific time each day for a few minutes of thinking in English, like during your morning coffee or your commute. Keeping it regular but manageable makes it easier to stick with it.
And don't be too hard on yourself if you miss a day. Just pick up where you left off. It's about progress, not perfection. Also, you can try setting reminders or using a language learning app to keep you on track.
Excellent advice, Anna. And our last question is from Carlos in Spain. He asks, "Is it normal to feel tired when trying to think in English for a long time?"
Definitely, Carlos. Thinking in a new language can be mentally exhausting because your brain is working harder to process the unfamiliar language. It's perfectly normal to feel tired, especially at the beginning.
Yes, and it's important to take breaks. Don't push yourself too hard. Gradually increase the time you spend thinking in English, and your brain will adapt over time.
Absolutely. Thanks to everyone for your questions. If you have more, feel free to reach out through our social media or website.
That's right. We love hearing from you and helping you on your English learning journey. Stick around for the conclusion, coming up next. And that brings us to the end of today's episode. We've covered a lot, from understanding why thinking in English is important, to overcoming challenges, practical tips, and answering your questions. Anna, what's your key takeaway from today's discussion?
For me, Jason, the biggest takeaway is that thinking in English is a powerful tool for improving fluency and confidence. It's a process that takes time, but with consistency and the right mindset, anyone can do it.
Absolutely. It's about small steps and celebrating progress along the way. Remember, everyone's journey is different, and it's okay to move at your own pace.
Exactly, and we hope today's episode has given you some practical strategies and inspiration to start thinking in English more often.
We'd love to hear how you're implementing these tips. Share your progress with us on social media or leave a comment on our website. Your feedback helps us create more content that's tailored to your needs.
That's right. And if you found this episode helpful, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with other English learners. It really helps the podcast grow and reach more people.
Thanks so much for tuning in. Keep practicing, stay motivated, and remember, you've got this.
Until next time, happy learning.
See you next time on the English Learning Podcast. Bye for now. Thanks for listening to the English Learning Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to hit subscribe so you don't miss our future episodes filled with tips and tricks to improve your English.
And if you have any questions or topics you'd like us to cover, feel free to reach out. You can find us on social media or visit our website at Insert Website.
We'd love to hear from you. Until next time, keep practicing, stay positive, and keep thinking in English.
Bye for now and happy learning.